So Julia, thank you so much for spending some time. I know you're really busy. And I was so pleased to talk with you the other day and hear about what you've been doing with interaction styles. And I thought that would be very helpful for people to hear some of what you've been doing. And I know you're sort of in the middle of doing some work. So I wanted to say, thank you for bringing us into your living space.
Yes.
so that we could grab a few moments here to share these things. So
no, my pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I know we were talking about interaction styles and how I use interaction styles in my practice. And I have to say, I've been using it for over a decade. I think I was part of the original pilot program that you did. And it is actually evolved into the bedrock of my practice. So whether I'm doing trainings around feedback and coaching, leadership, even proposal writing, I teach interaction styles first because it is interaction or communication styles is really at the bedrock and the foundation of everything that I do. And then it allows me to apply the interaction styles to almost anything that I teach.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I was thinking about what are some of the kind of the benefits, the things that you've seen happen as a result of that.
What's really interesting is, so all of my clients, for the most part, are on retainer. And so I develop year-long to 5-year-long curriculums. And so it creates this common language. So people actually use it with each other and they'll say, I need to really feed the drive of my chart the course person on the team. And when I actually, feed that need for them to anticipate, they are so much more productive. And if I'm really clear and succinct on what the desired result is, it allows them to really excel. So for many of my clients, you can hear them talk about interaction styles constantly and how they can really appreciate and leverage the diversity on their team. So that's always for me, one of the measures of success is that they're using it at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning.
That's great.
Their own, to really not delineate people's differences as much as really give people what they need in order to succeed.
Wow. Yeah.
And so, I see it just part of, I think the other thing too is when you look at all the other models, and, I've taught numerous ones, what I love about the interaction style model is it focuses on how people tend to communicate when they're trying to influence others. And I'll always ask at the beginning of every class, how many of you need to influence someone? And of course, every hand goes up. And so they can use it to influence their boss. They can use it to influence their potential sales, if they're in sales, their prospective client. They can use it to sometimes influence their kids and spouses. But I think for me, the core is communication influences everything. And if you can communicate in a way that people can understand and take action on, you're going to increase your probability of success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've been thinking about this. You said a decade.
Yeah.
But it's been longer than that.
It's been, it has been. I was hoping people would think I was younger. So,
well, but you started when you were about, what, 2? Something like that.
3,
well, along with me, 2 or 3.
Yes,
yeah.
I've been using it. I would say, as far as models, it's the one I use each and every class. But what has it been? Close to how many years? You can tell. I'll tell the
20.
At least, yeah.
At least, yeah. Maybe 30. No, surely not 30.
No, it's
maybe
about
20.
It's about years. Yeah. And I think it's also the applications for me have evolved over time.
What are some of those?
Yeah, so I think the application in one of the activities I do is help people structure their emails so they can speak to all four interaction styles. And so for your take charge style, you know really put the action and bold it up front so you catch them. You don't bury the lead with your in charge style. And then for your get things going style, you write the email that has that includes people. And for your behind the scenes, you make sure you tell them why and the rationale for what your ask or request is. And you structure an email in a really logical way so people understand the purpose and desired results of your email. And so we do several activities around really the best way to write an email, or even when you're on Slack with somebody, knowing their interaction styles and really framing the conversation so that they will respond to you. That's one of the applications I find very, very useful.
Yeah, it's actually one that I wound up doing myself as well. Like I would start to answer an email rather directly myself behind the scenes, but I would answer it just thinking about the task, which, and the content. And then I would think, maybe I ought to say, how are you doing today? And it's sort of like I didn't think about them as people, but I know you don't want too much of that, but because it's still work regardless. But I think that's one of the things. I know you started out with doing lots of other kinds of training. And it seems like over the years you've talked to me about some of the ways you've integrated it into kind of standard training. Would you share some of those?
Yeah, so, my kind of area of expertise is anything around leadership and management. But I just fundamentally have this belief that unless you understand yourself and the ways in which you communicate, I don't think you can be a great leader. And then I think I think the hallmark of great leadership today is being agile, being adaptable. And the only way, the thing I appreciate about interaction styles is it allows me to slip and slide, to adapt as the needs of the situation dictate. And it's very simple to change my language from directing to informing once I'm aware of that distinction. So I think it gives people tools on a number of different levels to become better leaders, managers, to give feedback. I think we tend to give feedback based on who we are, not who they are. And I notice I'll really appreciate someone who's a lot like me. And then not necessarily be as appreciative of somebody who does it differently. So this gives me a lens. So that's why, like I say, it's become so foundational, whatever I'm teaching, that they understand and know this tool. I think if there's any of the myriad of tools out there, and I bring in a lot of different ones, but the one that I always insist clients bring in, and it's kind of like a no pass if they don't, I may pass on the client, is they have to bring in the interaction style model. And I have not gotten pushback because it's, and I think these are your words, it's easy enough to really understand in a few hours, but it's rich enough to continually unpack and apply, for a lifetime. And that's certainly what I found with my clients. And I'm definitely oversubscribed at this point. So,
Well, that's an enviable place to be.
It's fun, but and I've also found it translates through different cultures, whether I'm in Australia, or Germany, or depending on different cultures, they embrace very readily what they hear people say and see people do, which is it's easy for people.
Yeah, I remember when you did your first training in Germany and you came back and talked about how the audience was so different.
Yeah.
In terms of, I guess what I would say is like the norm, like different composition of what was expected to be the usual communication.
Yeah. And they were scientists scientists as well. So, you know, it was an interesting group where, you know, English definitely wasn't, they, you know, they spoke business English, but not necessarily colloquial. It was when I realized how colloquial my language is. Um, but I think people really appreciate it's concrete. You know, what do I hear people say and see people do? And also in a business forum, I don't find it's as intrusive psychologically. So people really share what they want to share, how they like to work, how they like to be communicated to, how they like to receive directions. So it doesn't feel as intrusive as some of the other frameworks that I've used.
Right. It's like a safe start to start talking about differences, and then you can get into some more psychological aspects that are a little more subtle.
Yeah.
And that may feel a little more personal, but once you start setting the safety with interaction styles, yeah, that helps. Yeah.
And that's always my starting point. And, you know, oftentimes then they want um, essential motivators.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah.
okay, now why do we do what we do? Particularly as leaders, how do I intrinsically motivate people? And what I end up doing quite often is the cognitive dynamics. Because for me, and you know that I love doing the cognitive dynamics, and that's where if I frame them in those kind of three phases, people find all three of those tools very useful.
Yeah.
But I always begin with interaction styles.
Yeah, we learned that quite early, that it's so easy to recognize, and on occasion, I don't know if you've had this happen, but I've had occasion where you have a team session, and I've just started with one thing and thought maybe this will be a short half-day thing.
Yeah.
And just directing and informing differences winds up being a hot topic, and then you have that decision: do I finish this, or do we just stay with what they need?
Yeah.
And that can be very powerful for resolving those kinds of conflicts that have been there.
Yeah, and I've actually that directing and informing continuum, that's an entire conversation sometimes, as you said. And it's really funny because people think they're more flexible than they actually are. And it's funny to watch people get loudly informing when they think they're being directing, and call each other out on it too. So that's just a fun exercise that, you know, as a practitioner, if you don't have enough time, just that alone, you know, people find it very useful.
Right, right. So you can just pull it out of the hat sometimes in the middle of doing something else.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's a good energizer as well.
Yeah. Especially if there's a lot of heat around it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think it's so interesting with directing people. And I tend to ask this of different, you know, when I'm working with leaders and their teammates, I'll ask them, you know, if they're very directing, do you mind pushback? And they're like, well, of course, no, I want you to push back. And it's really amazing how that cracks open. Even if someone's direct, it doesn't mean it's a done deal. There really is an invitation to have a dialogue. And just that alone, particularly when there's team members that might not be getting along, or a boss that's directive, and you go, oh, I can push back. And they're like, yes, I've been expecting you to. So there's just a lot of different ways you can go with that conversation.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've really maximized the use of it all the way through, all of the kinds of things that you're teaching people to do in terms of being better leaders, better managers, better team members.
Yeah, and yesterday I actually led an enterprise sales, you know, the mid-year conference, and we were talking about the sales cycle and how, you know, when at the beginning of the funnel, you're really informing and looking at all these options, but when you're really trying to do the assumptive close, you want to be more direct. sign here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Please do this. And it's not bossy. There's just, kind of the directing and informing continuum aligns with the sales funnel. So that was a really dynamic conversation we had yesterday.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. I know a woman who came to our trainings probably after you had had yours, and instituted it in her husband's dental practice,
Oh,
and
interesting.
recognized that his style was naturally informing and behind the scenes just gives some information which was appropriate for the expert to do as a dentist.
Sure.
And then she trained the office staff to vary what they did depending on what they were doing with when it was time to check out, to get much more definite
Yeah.
and sort of, in a way, take charge, be
Yeah.
more in charge when maybe they weren't naturally that way, to help people come to closure about their appointments and deal with all those touchier situations like how much is it going to cost and everything like
Yeah.
that. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So, well, is there anything else you would like to pass on to people about your use and benefit to clients and organizations?
Uh, no, I mean, I think that we've covered it. I mean, I tend to do integrative thinking. And so uh, I tend to look at what problem am I trying to solve for this organization? And no matter what that specific issue is that they've come to me, underlying that is there's communication disconnect. So I guess why wouldn't you use a tool that's so effective and easy um, as a foundation or a launching point to really solve some of the bigger issues and systemic issues in an organization. So, that's why, I mean, I'm one of your biggest fans, and, certainly it really is been, I mean, my practice, I'd done other tools, but it really took off when I started using interaction styles as core. I mean, it's kind of, like I said, a no pass if you don't do it, or I pass on them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great, wonderful. Well, it is so good to hear about all the ways you've been doing this for however many years it's been, and the way you've worked that into this more comprehensive practice that you have now,
Yeah.
as opposed to the one-offs and things like that often we consultants wind up getting called in to do, so you can make a really lasting difference in the organization. So
Yeah, and I guess one last thing I would say is oftentimes I am called in for that one-off team building, want to do something in 2 or 3 hours, right? And I have to say, when I lead then with interaction styles, if I've had the time to do the one-off, I would say it rarely ends up being a one-off. If you can, you know, make them see value, and they you don't have to make them, they see value in it, and talk about how you apply this to coaching or performance management or to feedback. That's where you see the real your business grow. They're like, oh, we can take this, what else can you do? So it's always those one-offs tend to be end up with year-long curriculums if you
mm,
really do them right and manage the expectations. Yeah.
well, good to know that. I have
Yeah.
one more thing we might add.
Sure.
Coaching. You said that you told me about having however many coaching clients you have in addition to doing the trainings and the consulting. So this whole idea of how are you using it in the coaching? What do you like about interaction styles and coaching?
It's interesting because coaching is not prescriptive. Um, and I think what's interesting about the clients I work with is they've all been in class with me. So it really is the class, the learning and development is the funnel for, and I think right now I'm coaching, I don't even want to say, I think I have at least 42 coaching clients that I'm seeing at various cadences. But because they have that common language with me, um, it's always something that we can hearken back to, particularly when there's conflict involved. Um, so I use it in my practice. I also coach someone of the chart. I use multiple models, obviously, in coaching. Um, but I'm not sure how coaches coach without knowing interaction styles or temperament or cognitive functions, because I coach differently. If I have someone who's chart the course in their nature, um, we do, just in that coaching engagement that I have with them, um, we send agendas in advance, and I, may bring certain things with me, or I'll send them articles based on their interaction styles. Whereas a take charge person, I'm not going to send them homework because they may or may not read it, or I'll send them, something that they can assimilate very quickly, or they'll have homework, something they can do more that's very quick. So I actually find in my coaching practice, I just coach people differently based on their interaction styles, whether they're familiar with the model or not. Most often they're familiar with the model.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And I've often heard that there are actual behaviors that you can suggest for them subtly, obviously not prescriptive, but get them to see different behaviors. It's like a map.
Yes.
For giving them a different repertoire or having them try things on.
Yeah, and I was just on the phone with somebody prior to our call, and she said, I've noticed my chart the course event planner is brilliant logistically, and she's just so well cast. But if I ask her to make a change, there's this physical she's physically just kind of stops. And I used to take that as a no, she didn't want to do it. Now I know she's just in her head recalibrating her compass, so to speak, so she can change what we've planned and get us to the desired result. So just in watching, she said, I've learned to watch the physical cues that people have because she knows the framework.
Right. So it gives them a bigger toolkit.
Yeah. She said it was a clue. At first I thought she was resisting my changes. Now I realize, no, she just needs a minute to really assimilate and take it on board, and she'll come up with a better process than I could. So I think that's a good example of a manager using it in their practice.
And that's actually, even though it looks like you're dealing with an individual differences model, you've actually wound up developing the skill of perspective taking that people need if they're going to be good leaders.
Yeah, and that's I think that's what you don't get to do so much of if you do these one-off, short sessions. That perspective shifting, really, I think it differentiates your good managers from your great managers. Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you so much for taking the time with us, and so happy this is all, being one of the first people to start to use this lens, and now you've managed to develop so much more with it and put it to good use for so many people. So it warms my heart to
well, thank you. And as I said, I'm really, my goal is to teach the next generation of great leaders and coaches, and so I send them to you. Yeah, obviously. And so thank you for doing what you're doing. It's obviously been life-changing for me, and I know all the people you touch, so thanks.